Welcome to Faith After Faith, a podcast that explores the territory between losing your faith and finding it again. I'm your host, Katie Langston, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about something that I've seen a lot of in the news over the past couple of days and weeks, and that is new data coming out from sources like Ryan Burge and Jana Riess and Pew and many other such sources that are sort of pointing all in the same direction, that is, Mormon women are leaving. And in the interview I did with Jana that I just posted up on Tuesday, she talked a little bit about this, where she said that in her previous book, The Next Mormons, which was a data-driven study on who millennial and Gen Z Mormons were, she noted that women were significantly more likely to be faithful than men. And in her most recent work with the book Leaving Mormonism, that's going to be coming out next year from Oxford University Press, that distinction between men and women has entirely eroded to the point now that women are perhaps more likely to leave the church than even men are. And so this has been a hot topic on social media. It's been a hot topic in the news. Salt Lake Tribune here has had a couple of stories. First is Jana's reporting on this data. Why are so many young women leaving the LDS Church? That was published on August 15th. And then again on August 18th, a more reported story of folks speculating as to the cause of the decline. Now, to put this in some context, back in the 1980s, Mormonism was expected to and was on a trajectory to just kind of grow exponentially over the next 100 years or so. Rodney Stark kind of famously projected something like anywhere from 63 to 265 million members by 2080. But actually, we're right now at 17.8 million, and the curve is not nearly as expansive as that. And more to the point, only about 4 in 10 Gen Z women are still in the church or still identify as Mormon. These are women who were raised in the church. And this is pretty astonishing. This is not a great sign. So, of course, you have sort of the usual suspects when it comes to explanations on offer, right? So on the one hand, you've got kind of the world got worse and what's to blame is the culture around us. Lawrence Corbridge kind of famously put up a video from on YouTube where he said, don't worry about the culture. Darth Vader could be your bishop and the culture, meaning the church culture, could be like Alcatraz and still it will not drive you away, meaning it should not drive you away, meaning even if everything is terrible, you should still stay because it's true. And if you don't, that's a you problem, right? Barbara Morgan Gardner, a BYU religion professor who did one of the analyses that sort of indicated the decline of young women's participation in the church, blames the culture at large as well. She says the church teaches almost the opposite of what the millennial zeitgeist is, encouraging a community built upon principles of righteousness, sacrifice, personal responsibility and accountability, virtue, charity, covenant relationships, consecration, unity, truth, and hard work. So sorry, guys. If you are influenced by the dominant culture, you completely neglect and have values that are the opposite of righteousness, sacrifice, personal responsibility and accountability, virtue, charity, covenant relationships, consecration, unity, truth, and hard work. I don't have a ton of sympathy for that. I think it's very easy to blame, secular woke ideology for this, but I think that way, way, way oversimplifies what's going on and is a deflection at best and is kind of complete and total head in the sand denial at worst. On the other hand, and these are some of my friends and colleagues that I've known over the years, there's this sort of argument, well, the church, the church did this. Joanna Brooks posted this on her Facebook page. Only a piece of what she shared was quoted in the Salt Lake Tribune, so she posted on her Facebook page the whole response that she sent to the Salt Lake Tribune. The LDS Church is unusual among mainstream American religions in its intense focus on gender roles, not only in priesthood and ritual settings, but in the everyday lives of its members. That intensity levied over the past 5 decades has taken a toll on women in the Mormon community and contextualizes the present moment. And then Christine Haglund, who's a historian, says the failure on the part of the church to develop a coherent response is part of the problem. It conveys "we don't care," which I don't actually think is true. Still, its absence can feel like neglect. So here we have 2 ways of looking at the same data. I think charitably, there is some truth probably in both. I'm not very inclined to be particularly sympathetic to the Lawrence Corbridge, even if Darth Vader is your bishop, you shouldn't leave the church kind of attitude. I think that's pretty harmful. And if Darth Vader is your bishop, you should leave so that you don't get taken over to the dark side. But I do think it's true that the culture has shifted, and that fundamental cultural shift is a big part of the problem. Right. And so Barbara Morgan Gardner is going to read that in a way that sort of blames the women and girls for buying into the culture, whereas someone like Joanna Brooks is going to think of that in more negative terms. I really like the analysis that Jana Riess did in her article, the August 5th piece. She kind of names 3 Ps. She goes with the cultural explanation where she says, look, the culture of the church is at odds with the broader culture, and pinpoints it into 3 places. First, she says politics. Now, this is not exclusive only to Mormons, right? Here's a slide for those of you who are watching on YouTube that shows the partisan distance between men and women and how much more liberal LDS women are than LDS men. So in 2006, there was only 3 points of difference between LDS men and women. And in 2026, there are now 15 points of distance between LDS women and LDS men in terms of how liberal they are. This is also something that we're seeing in the wider culture where women are becoming more liberal, men are staying about the same, possibly even in some cases becoming more conservative. And I have heard people speculate, how is the species even going to propagate with this issue of such profound political polarization? I have seen this playing out in the lives of my Gen Z kids, where the girls are for sure more liberal than the boys, or the young women than the young men. And so this is one area where Jana, I think, points to that distinction between Mormon culture and the culture writ large. And she names things like, the ERA opposition in the 1970s, the kind of anti-same-sex marriage campaigns of the 2000s, 2010s, and again, the sort of anti-ERA stuff that happened in 2019 to 2020. She has brought up things like abortion, those kinds of things. And I do think, without making any political judgment one way or another, I do think that's an important factor. The second P Jana speaks to is purity culture. And again, this is not exclusive to Mormons, right? Evangelical culture as well as Mormon culture in the 90s and, 2000s, 2010s, whatever, did seem obsessed with purity culture. You had things, especially in evangelical movements, like purity rings and purity pledges. And a lot of that emphasis was on women and girls, which isn't to say that boys were encouraged to be promiscuous or to be, sexually impure, as it were. But a lot of the emphasis was on girls to be safeguards of the sexuality of men. I remember being told in young women, A, your purity or your virtue is the most important thing you have. B, to commit sexual sin is the sin next to murder, which is a crazy thing to tell anyone, especially an adolescent. And then 3, that as a girl, as a young woman, my job was to safeguard the purity of the boys by not being a temptress, right? And Jana noted that girls, especially in like the 2000s, 2010s, girls heard about immodest dress in particular about 6 times more than boys did, like in church magazines and the Strength of the Youth pamphlet and things like that. It was like long lists of things that girls should avoid. The idea being that if you are a girl and you're dressing in a way that is immodest or provocative, it's your fault if a boy looks upon you with lust, right? Kind of a crazy thing, but it was taught right over the pulpit. There's even that kind of infamous at this point quote from Dallin Oaks, who was then of the Quorum of the 12, now is the president and prophet of the church, where he said this shocking thing, "And young women, please understand that if you dress immodestly, you are magnifying this problem by becoming pornography to some of the men who see you." So that kind of dehumanization, that kind of objectification of women and girls, especially in a culture that has become much more educated about, say, the causes of sexual assault and things like that, right? In a post-Me Too world, there has been an emphasis on getting rid of sexual harassment and punishing sexual assault, these sorts of things. I remember I was still pretty Mormon and being pretty shocked by that quote because of how it objectified women. And so girls who are now coming of age, who were raised with this sort of rhetoric, are saying, nope, right? They're piecing right on out. The third P that Jana points to is powerlessness. And here she contrasts the experience of women and girls who can be CEOs, lawyers, doctors, student council presidents, professional athletes, like whatever, hold just about any job, with a church where they can't hold the priesthood, can't bless or pass the sacrament, can't baptize a convert. I remember when I was on my mission, one of my very few actual converts asked me to baptize her, and I had to tell her, well, I'm not allowed to do that. Can't really make policy, certainly can't be the final word on a policy. And this is a pretty stark contrast to how things function in the rest of the world. And so there is a sense of disconnect, right? That comes when you don't have positions of authority, or when positions of authority are not open to you. There's this kind of heartbreaking and funny story in that second Salt Lake Tribune piece that was relayed by Heather Sundahl. She's talking about being a primary teacher, so teaching the young kids. And this little girl says, "Wait, so what you're saying is a ghost can be part of the Godhead, but not a girl?" By explaining what the Holy Ghost or the Holy Spirit is part of the Godhead, but also that, that the Holy Ghost in Mormonism is gendered as male. And so that sort of disconnect at that even most cosmic level is something that, I agree with Jana, is something that the LDS Church will need to grapple with. Now, as I was reflecting on this question, okay, so, what is up with the ladies? Why are the women leaving? I wonder if there isn't a fourth P. At least this is what I experienced, and that is pressure. Mormon culture in particular is a pressure cooker. And I think for everyone, it's a pressure cooker. It is a high demand tradition. But there's something especially about being a Mormon woman that is high pressure. And people more and more are sort of opting out of the demands of that high pressure culture. I did not want this to be a sort of I told you so victory lap or anything like that. But in 2016, I was writing about this, and a lot of us were writing about this on blogs and stuff like that. I had a post in February 2016 called Breathing Room on feminist Mormon housewives. And in it, I'm talking about how I've decided to sort of step away from the church and why I have done that. I wrote, over the past few years, I've felt increasing pressure to conform. Excommunications and acquaintances who share similar perspectives to mine, policies that place heteronormativity ahead of the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And here I'm talking about the policy that came out in 2015 that really punished the children of gay couples, or even the doctrine of like temple marriage being required for exaltation, those sorts of things, right? To me, those are and have been for a very long time in my mind antithetical to the gospel of Christ. The requirement to go into a room with a stranger every couple of years and declare that I'm thinking the right thoughts and drinking the right beverage with my breakfast. It all became too much. Eventually, I ran out of breathing room. And I remember very vividly conversations with my sisters and with my friends as I was going through this period where I said, I wish I could just carve out a little space for myself to be sort of maybe an unorthodox kind of member of the community, where maybe I didn't follow all the rules or believe in all the things, but that was okay, that I could still be part of it. And just increasingly that felt less and less and less tenable. It felt like there wasn't any space for someone with the questions or concerns that I had. It felt like the leadership was not only not listening to us, but like actively trying to ignore or push us out. And that hurt. It did. And now 10 years later, only 4 in 10 young women are still active in the church. I want to point out that what we find in the culture writ large is that certainty, more than belief, is what's on the decline. So this comes out of the Pew Research Center, and there is a decline in belief in God, right? So in 2007, 92% of Americans believe in God or universal spirit or force or whatever. By 2024, that's down to around 80%. But look at the sharp decline in people who believe but are not certain about their beliefs. So 71% of people said that they believed in God with absolute certainty in 2007. And that number has dropped to 55% as of, 2024. And there's something about, again, the cultural milieu in which we're living that makes certainty very hard, with all kinds of scientific advancements, with questions about how we make meaning in a world where we recognize that the answers to the questions that we had in the past are a lot more complicated than they used to be, or a lot more complicated than we thought they were, all that kind of stuff. And I think that's a big part of the pressure, right? Jana Riess has talked about this as well in her own research and data, that especially for young women, even the ones who are active and believe are significantly less likely than their, male counterparts to say, I know, right? That is something that is embedded in the culture. You're supposed to get up in testimony meetings on Sunday and you say, I know the church is true, and I know Joseph Smith was a prophet, and I know. And believing young women in particular are less likely to be able to stand up and say that. I actually think that's a good thing, right? I think certainty is not particularly helpful. You can have confidence, you can have trust, but certainty is not faith. Faith, by its essence, means that you're not sure, but you hope so, right? Anyone who is trying to suggest that you must be certain about questions of ultimate meaning, they're selling something. And a church culture that doesn't permit a lack of certainty, or that punishes a lack of certainty, is going to be read as wildly dissonant to people who live in our culture. Here's another chart where you can look and see, right? So certainty by birth decade has gone down dramatically. So if you're looking at that 55%, People born before 1970 are around 64% certain, whereas the younger generations, those born in the 2000s, are at 39% certainty, right? And even the atheists aren't certain. 6% of the youngest cohort are absolutely certain that God does not exist, which has barely moved across generations, even as atheism or agnosticism has increased. Both the believers and the non-believers remain uncertain. And so the question that I want to look at is, how do we reassemble faith without the pressure, right? And I want to make sure that I'm being fair here. So I'm a mainline Protestant. I'm a Lutheran pastor. Mainline Protestants are comprised of Methodists, Lutherans, Presbyterians, Episcopalians, Congregationalists, kind of the old traditions of Europe that migrated over to the United States in waves throughout history. Our attention sucks. Right? Our attention sucks almost worse than anyone else. Like mainline Protestants are somewhere around 30%, whereas Mormons are at 41%, evangelical Protestants are at 44%, and Roman Catholics are at 48%. I mean, no one's doing well, right? No one's doing well. But my tradition, I'm going to just go ahead and name, is doing especially badly. Mainline Protestants used to be kind of the dominant culture in American society, the dominant force. And as these traditions have grown, they've become a little bit more wishy-washy. As someone who swims in that soup, there is a real hesitation to make definitive claims about anything. There is a real hesitation to kind of emphasize what's moral and what's not moral. So I don't think the answer is just, woo, whatever, right? But neither is the answer this kind of high pressure, high demand sort of thing. And there's a great chart, sort of learned this in seminary, where it talks about support and challenge as if they're on an XY axis. Now, a couple of thoughts on the terms support and challenge. So support means real presence and kindness, engagement, understanding, grace, forgiveness, and being there with you in the real world, real life, joys and struggles of living. It's trust. It's a community or people that you believe have your best interests at heart that you can be honest and real with. That's real support, right? Challenge, on the other hand, does not necessarily mean kind of in your face challenging, but it does mean kind of a culture of expectation that says, hey, we have responsibilities to each other. We have responsibilities to care for each other. We have responsibilities to serve one another. We have responsibilities to behave morally and ethically, right? So that's what's meant by support and challenge. So in a high support but a low challenge system, you have people who are enabled or permitted to act badly. And that breeds entitlement and mistrust, right? It's great to be affirmed. It's great to be welcomed. It's great to be supported. But what if the thing that you're being supported in is actually pretty self-destructive or destructive to the community or whatever? Sometimes love does require correction. And I know that can be wildly abused. And it is often wildly abused. So don't mishear me, right? If the challenge is connected to things that are healthy and hopeful and good, right? And it's not loving to let slide abuse and mistreatment and unkindness, right? That's codependency. So a high support, low challenge atmosphere maybe is codependent. That's another word for that. A low challenge, low support community. Like, what is even the point of that? At least in the high support, low challenge, some people might act like dipshits, and so that sucks, but like, at least people are nice, right? In a low challenge, low support, it's like, there's no reason to be here. No one is kind. No one is asking anything of me. I think about sometimes there are these churches that just, have like 20 people in them and they're just hanging on for the sake of hanging on. Now, don't get me wrong. They're very vibrant. Small Christian communities, but there are some that are like, right, we're going to use the same hymn book that we've been using for 50 years because we've been using it for 50 years and no one is excited about anything that they're doing. They're just doing it because they've always done it. That's a low challenge, low support culture, and that's not going to be very effective or helpful to anyone. Then there's the high challenge, low support culture, which is domination. That's fear and manipulation. That's high pressure, high demand systems, right? And a lot of times a high challenge, low support system will pretend like it's a high challenge, high support system. It's like, well, what do you mean? We provide all these resources. We do all these things. We're constantly checking in on each other. Remember, go back to the definition of support. Support is unconditional love and grace. Support is where you can show up and be real, right? Where you don't have to hide or pretend. And though we have ideals of the responsibility that we have to one another and to our community writ large and to the world, we also know we're going to mess up. And so there is grace and there is love. And so in a high challenge, low support system, even though they might say they're a high support system, it's really just that support is really just more challenge. And there isn't a place where you can go to feel like you can be real, to feel like you can fail, right? And then finally, and this is where you want to be, is in the high support, high challenge quadrant. That's where there's liberation. That's where there's empowerment and opportunity. My experience with folks who've been in recovery, AA is this sort of place where there is a high challenge, right? We're here because our addiction has become unmanageable and we don't want to keep doing this, right? So there's something that we're trying to do. We're trying to change. But it's also incredibly high support where you can come and you can say, honestly, I fell off the wagon again. Where you can come and you can say, honestly, I really struggle with this. I'm having a hard time with that, right? And get that kind of unconditional positive regard and get that real support for the real things that are going on. And in its best incarnation, the church does that. It's a place where we come and we say, okay, we know that our responsibility to each other is love and care and service. And our responsibility to the community is to feed the hungry and to clothe the naked and to welcome the stranger. So it's high challenge in that sense, right? And we also know that we're going to make mistakes, that we're not going to be okay all the time. So what does it look like then? Right? If I've spent all this time, and using Mormonism as a bit of a microcosm, but again, these are trends that we're seeing all throughout Christianity. What might a healthy, liberative faith community actually look like where you could go and not be certain, but also be loved and also do good, right? So here are a few things that I would suggest to either look for or, bless them, I'm sure they want my opinion, but if the LDS Church wants to try to confront some of this, here's some suggestions. And one is to have a truly healthy community. And a truly healthy community is one of both high challenge, but also, very importantly, high support. So when you don't know, you can say, I don't know. If you disagree with the leadership, you can say, I disagree with the leadership. If you have a perspective that you want to raise that isn't a dominant perspective, you can speak up and people will hear you, right? There is a lightness in a healthy community where there is laughter and no one takes themselves too seriously, and where people are free to show up as they are and to be loved. I think this is perhaps where some of the folks in my tradition maybe sometimes fall down, is that I do think you need to have theology that makes real claims. You don't have to demand conformity or certainty from the people who are participating in it. But for example, the Christian faith claims that this, first century Palestinian homeless preacher is the actual incarnation of God and shows us what real power is, which is self-giving love. That's a real claim about not just history, right? But it's a claim about what is and should be. And we say there's something real about the universe, about the world, about what it is to be human and what it is to live in this world that we see in Jesus, and that we take that seriously. It's scary, especially when you come from a tradition that demands certainty or pressure. It's scary to look at something and try to say, okay, this is saying something real that's going to affect how I live and how I approach the world. I remember being absolutely sick, literally sick to my stomach, when I realized I think I believe in the resurrection. Because I had gone through, in my deconstruction process, had gone through a period of just kind of saying, I don't know, all roads lead to Rome kind of a thing. And certainly I would still say there's a lot that I don't know, and I would never use the word know about any of this. And certainly I would also still say that, that God is present with all people and loves everyone. But when I said, oh no, I believe in Jesus. I believe that he, was crucified, died, and was buried and rose again on the third day. That took hold of my life in a way that was transformative, and I'll be honest, completely terrifying. Because I needed the refuge of the uncertainty, the total uncertainty for a while. So finding a community that does have bedrock beliefs that sit at the center of what they do and what they are, but that also has space for you not to be as sure, that's a good place to be. 3 is attention to beauty. There have been trends over the past several hundred years, especially in Christianity, to get away from beautiful art and music and aesthetics. And everyone has a different kind of definition of this. But gosh, look for a community where they want things to be beautiful. Because more than anything, I think beauty helps us access something beyond ourselves and puts us in touch with that. 4, I would say sturdiness in the tradition. Again, one of the things that, as I was reconstructing, that I realized about kind of the broader Christian tradition writ large, is that there isn't a question I have that someone hasn't already asked and taken very seriously. Which isn't to say that every answer is satisfactory or that I come to the same conclusion, but anything that I could be going through emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, there are practices for that, right? One of the ones I love to counsel with people about is the practice of lament. I didn't know, coming out of Mormonism, that you were allowed to be super freaking pissed off at God. I didn't know that you could call God on the carpet and say, what are you doing here? This is not okay. Yet there is this deep and vast tradition of anger and of sorrow and of wishing for things to be better than they are, because we recognize that they're not, that there's evil and that there's hurt, right? And so a tradition where there are resources of practice and people who have been through it, both in the past and in the present, that you can rely on, is really important. And then finally is the space and the grace to show up honestly. I think a faith community that is healthy and that is worth your time is one where you can come and say what's true. And there are precious few of those. It's sort of a tragedy, actually. People are leaving our traditions because they don't have this, right? And I think to the extent that we could reclaim and recapture some of those things, and to the extent that you can find a place that has this collection of features, that's a place that's worth investing in. That's a place that's worth exploring. That's a place where you can be held through whatever you're going through. That's what I've got today on this episode of Faith After Faith. Just some reflections and some ideas about why folks are leaving and maybe, what could be done about it. If you want to support this work, I would invite you to go to faithafterfaith.com. Any recurring gift will get you access to bonus episodes, including full interviews. So, for example, my interview with Jana Riess, I had to edit out some of the stuff she had about the LDS Church and women and what they are trying to do to support people who are going through a crisis of faith. I'm not able to include everything in every episode, and so hearing Jana talk about that's available with the full episode that you can get as a recurring giver to Faith After Faith. Of course, if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. Or if you're listening on your favorite podcast app, if you could rate and review this podcast, it really does help. Everyone says that, but as I'm doing this venture, I'm realizing, actually that really does help. But of course, the very best compliment you can pay is to share this podcast with a friend. If it's been helpful to you, if it's caused some food for thought, pass it along. Thanks for being with me today on Faith After Faith. I'm Katie Langston. Until next time.